Hey folks, we're kicking off a new video series called Kingshot Kickstart, which will focus on targeted guides to onboard players to all of Kingshot's complexities that aren't really well explained in-game. And what better place to start than research? Kingshot throws a massive tech tree at you and says, good luck. However, there is no indication of what is a more versus less valuable return on your investment, and making the wrong choices can really set your account back. Now, there are plenty of guides out there that try to make sense of all of this, and I agree with some of their direction, but they all make one big mistake. Every guide misses the importance of specialization. And no, I'm not talking about specialization between troop types. I'm talking more broadly about what your Kingshot account is specializing in. And I propose that if you analyze the way you play Kingshot side by side with a variety of lesser known mechanics, you will start to see that research guidance should not be universal, but rather prioritize differently depending on what archetype of player you are. So I'm going to unpack 4 account archetypes in this video and walk you through how the research needs change between each one. First, let's start off with primarily free-to-play accounts. As a free-to-play player, you will constantly be trying to outsmart and outcompete players who decide to spend for an advantage. I don't say this to intimidate you, as I actually find this reality to be where the challenge and some of my personal enjoyment of the game comes from. And by the way, I recommend you subscribe to my channel for all sorts of smart tips, tricks, and guides to give you every advantage possible. However, here's the brutal truth. You will be most likely joining rallies of stronger players rather than hosting. There's a lot of unexpected ways that rallies can work, and I have a whole video on this linked below in the description to explain why. But what this means for you is that your combat research doesn't affect rallies that you join. Sad, but true. This means your battle tech tree should actually be deprioritized in general, with some minor exceptions. The most notable exception being regimental expansion, which increases your deployment capacity. This means not only more troops that you can bring as a rally joiner, but also larger marches that you can send individually to gather more resources or compensate slightly for lower combat stats. Otherwise, these stat bonuses won't do you all that much good unless you are solo marching or hosting rallies in the wilderness. But the game is balanced in such a way that you can rise to these challenges without investing heavily in the battle tree if you are an active player overall. In fact, I would even go a step further and advise that you should hold off on investing in some battle tech early in the game, and here's why. For the first few times the Hall of Governors comes around, before you get deep into Season 2 heroes, you'll be able to earn points based on the total strength gained by research projects. Eventually this will go away when the Hall of Governors event evolves into Strongest Governor, and you'll only get points for research speedups used. But for this earlier portion of the game, holding back on battle tech can be a key way you compete with spenders to earn outsized rewards. This is because some of these research projects can give you 10,000 or more power with maybe only an hour or 2 of research time needed. And if you save a bunch of these for your second or third Hall of Governors, then you can score tens of millions of points through research speedups in a single day and possibly nab a top rank depending on how much you save for the other days. Since these research projects will only help your account on solo marches, you won't really lose that much by holding off on completing them. And when it does come time for you to do any battle research one way or another, then the priority would be to do Archer Lethality and Infantry Health, followed closely by Cavalry Lethality. And then the next tier of priority would be Archer Attack and Infantry Defense, followed closely by Cavalry Attack. There's a lot of reasoning behind why this makes sense, and I have an entire video on it. Check out my Ultimate Kingshot Combat Guide linked below in the description. Okay, so we talked an awful lot about what a free-to-play player should not invest in. Now let's talk about what you should actually invest in. If we think about what rally joiners can meaningfully do to improve combat outcomes, it comes down to a couple things. One is to bring higher tier troops with better built-in base stats. You will take on the rally leader stat bonuses, but they will apply to the base values of the troops that you send to the rally. This means that the quicker you unlock higher tiers of troops, the better of a rally joiner you will be for your alliance. Accordingly, construction speed buffs will help you get there faster and should be prioritized. especially if you are strictly free to play and decided to forego the second construction slot purchase. And the second way you can enhance your role as a rally joiner is based on the number of troops that you can send. And this has a few dimensions to it. As we said, it means you should increase your deployment capacity with regimental expansion. It also means you should highly prioritize command tactics for extra march queues, especially if you are strictly free to play and did not purchase the extra march queue. It also means that you'll want to increase your training speed for troops with trainer tools, as well as your healing speed for injured troops with bandaging. The latter will allow you to do bigger batches of batch healings in events like Castle Battle. It also means you need to maximize the rate of resource acquisition as much as possible, because not only will you be resource constrained, but training and healing troops can become resource intensive at higher troop tiers. So in addition to the reasons of accelerating your own account growth, you'll want to spend time in your economy tree. In the first few weeks of the game, the output skills that increase your passive income will have the greatest return. But around Town Center level 20, you'll hit diminishing returns, and gathering becomes an even bigger driver of resource acquisition. So at that point, you'll want to start shifting your priority to foraging and gathering research over output research. Now, given all that I've said, you may think camp expansion and ward expansion might be high on the priority list. However, camp expansion does not actually increase the speed that troops are trained, just the total you can select in one batch from your training facilities. At lower levels, this can be helpful early on if you log in less frequently or want to train more troops while you sleep overnight. However, it soon hits diminishing returns since you could be spending 8 to 12 hours training higher tier troops anyway. Therefore, it becomes hard to justify the prioritization of the camp expansion projects at the bottom of the research tree, where it can require a couple weeks of research time for a negligible benefit. Similarly, ward expansion is great early on as your infirmary might not have enough capacity, particularly if you are on a more violent server. You will almost never need it, but when you do, you'll be glad you have it. However, if your server is well managed through non-aggression pacts between alliances, then this only ever really becomes a factor during Castle Battle or Kingdom versus Kingdom events. And even then in the late game it has diminishing returns. So if you aren't coming close to your infirmary capacity limit in these events, you probably don't need to prioritize it. That said, this could also be one of those projects you hold on to for Hall of Governors points early on, since you get a lot of power per project. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, you should absolutely prioritize tool enhancement to increase your research speed. The sooner you do it, the more benefit it will have to your account in total, since it only impacts future research projects. However, be smart about how ruthlessly you prioritize it. For example, if it's going to take you a couple weeks or even a month to eke out a couple percentage points in research speed, but you have Castle Battle coming up and need a couple of bandaging projects done in time, then maybe hold off on tool enhancement temporarily. So if we put this all together, top priority is tool enhancement for faster research, tooling up for better construction speed, command tactics for more march queues, and resource tech that accelerates the tempo of your account and can help kick off a virtuous cycle. The next wave of priority is stepping into what your account should specialize in as a rally joiner, which means regimental expansion for troop capacity, trainer tools for quicker troop development, and bandaging for superior troop healing. Situational priority is ward expansion and camp expansion, if either one of them feels like a bottleneck to your playstyle. And then the lowest priority of all is, unfortunately, the battle tech stat enhancements. And in fact, you should consider saving it to score points in Hall of Governors. Okay, so let's talk about if you are a low to mid spender. If you just jumped to this section because you are not a free-to-play player, then I recommend you go back and watch the free-to-play section anyway. Everything I said in that section is relevant to you, but I'll be making some key modifications to it, and I don't want to waste everyone's time re-explaining the guiding logic again here. So there are a few key differences between how a free-to-play player will operate their account versus a low to mid spender. Because a spender will likely have that second construction slot, the tooling up skill actually has more value early on, depending on how many speed ups and resources you are willing to purchase with cash. It will also paradoxically have less value later in the game, as you will eventually have built all of the buildings in town and be sitting with an excess of construction speed ups, while being generally bottlenecked by True Gold. So get it up as soon as possible to accelerate your growth, but also bear in mind that you probably won't get so good a return on investment by the time you get to the bottom of the research tree for tooling up number 7. Another key distinction is that the more you spend, the more likely you will be to find yourself as a rally leader versus a rally joiner. The direct implication of this is that you should not deprioritize the battle stats tech in the same way as a free-to-play player should. While you should still prioritize lethality over attack, and health over defense, as well as infantry and archers over cavalry, you will benefit more by building this sort of research sooner. In the economy tree, you can afford to overlook the output skills a bit more since you'll reach the point where gathering outpaces your town production sooner. This is because not only do you hit the point of diminishing returns on the resource buildings quicker, but you can assemble larger marches of higher tier troops quicker to support your gathering efforts. And if you are in the higher spender range, you might also want to prioritize that infirmary capacity and healing a bit more to protect your investments. I've noticed that players who spend more are generally correlated with, let's call it, the need to flex in combat a little bit more. This means that more troops can end up in the infirmary quite rapidly, which can cause some of your account investment to get drained. And while it can't prevent it as fully as smart play, it may make sense to grab these two a little sooner. So all in all, I think this archetype is probably the most applicable to the conventional wisdom of other research priority guides. There are clear things on each tree you want to focus on, and quite bluntly, you'll need to build them all to stay competitive with others at your spend level. The only things you can safely deprioritize would be the resource output projects and camp expansion. Now, if you're a big spender, then we sort of start to flip this thing on its head a little bit. And what I mean by that is that what we are prioritizing is not so much about managing the scarcity of in-game resources like the other archetypes, but rather trying to get the greatest value per dollar of your spending through prioritization. So if we think about a player who has the means to frequently buy packs, they will likely be flushed with all of the resources and speed-ups that are typically stuffed into different packs in order to add to the perceived value. This means we can deprioritize much of the economy tree at first. Now eventually you will want to do the gathering skills because they help compete in points for kingdom versus kingdom prep and remove resources from being a potential bottleneck, which will reduce some inefficient spend. However, this is just not really an early priority. For the growth tree, I still think it's important to grab tool enhancement for faster research. While you do get the research speedups, there are literally thousands of days worth of research to get across all of the tech trees, so this one still pays dividends. And you can use these speedups instantly to complete it so you aren't spending 2 weeks clogging up other research projects. You can also safely ignore a lot of the later tooling up research for construction speed due to your speedups. Get the first few because they are cheap and quick to do if you want, but you will very quickly have empty building queues while you wait for new building upgrades to be introduced into the game. You could argue that not researching these might actually be a competitive advantage, since eventually you'll earn points in Strongest Governor and similar events by the amount of construction speedups that you consume. And you'll have plenty of extras in the late game without buildings to build since they're all maxed out. So this could help you actually get more points if you don't research them. You should definitely get the troop training and healing skills in this tree to grow your army quicker and protect your investment. Again, the camp expansion skill is situationally helpful, but is probably the lowest return on investment out of these 4 troop-related skills. And of course, in the battle tree, you'll be taking everything as soon as you can. Again, still following lethality and health over attack and defense as a rule, as well as infantry and archers over cavalry within this tree. However, you'll want to build all of it as quickly as you can. And one last archetype worth briefly mentioning here is farm accounts. For those who don't know, farm accounts are secondary accounts whose sole purpose is to exist for raiding by a main account to provide extra resources. Accordingly, you play a farm account differently than a main account. I'll eventually build a guide for farm accounts when I get around to it and add a link below in the description. But as far as the tech tree is concerned, we have very few things we care about. Unless your server gets frequent resource tile hits, you can skip almost all of the battle tree except for regimental expansion to improve gathering capacity. I would only ever research the other skills here to level 1 to unlock more regimental expansion projects, or to score quick points in the Hall of Governors for personal rewards, which can include more resources. For economy, prioritize gathering skills since the output skills for your resource buildings in town only produce protected resources which cannot be raided. Yes, a couple cheap projects for the output skills can be grabbed to give you more resources to develop your town with, but it's not as big of a priority. For the growth tree, tool enhancement still helps, but I wouldn't bother with the ones at the bottom of the tree since there is less return on investment since you have fewer things that are meaningful to research. Obviously grab command tactics for more march slots, which means more gathering. And you'll also want to prioritize trainer tools to get your army up quicker. And here the first few levels of camp expansion might actually be helpful, since you'll likely be logging in less frequently than your main account. You can also take ward expansion since this account will be weaker and may have less protection since it won't be in your main account's alliance in order to operate as a farm. This helps reduce the downside risk of another player attacking your town and ending up with tons of losses from a full infirmary. It will take a long time to recover from a lot of troop losses on a farm account, and it'll be way less useful in the interim. So this is more of an insurance policy against the worst case scenario. We're a bit less concerned with bandaging since you won't be in castle battles with this account, but it can still be somewhat helpful if you find yourself getting attacked on tiles often. And we also don't really need construction boosts from tooling up since you don't need to take your farm account all the way to town center level 30 and beyond anyway. I'll share some additional considerations now that you've seen how radically different research tech priority can be for different types of players. Firstly, while these priorities are described for your tech research, they are also applicable to Oasis Island buildings once you have reached Fountain level 10. In a way, you could look at Oasis Island as a second tech tree wrapped in a fun geospatial minigame. And to optimize that minigame and get your bonuses the fastest way possible, check out my Oasis Island guide linked below in the description. Secondly, you may have heard the term Armory account before. This is essentially a secondary account whose sole purpose is not farming, but rather to join rallies of your main account and supply additional troops. I didn't make an additional archetype on this since I would simply just recommend the exact same priorities as a rally joining free-to-play player that we talked about at the beginning of this video. Next, there are a number of things you can do outside your tech tree to improve research speed across the board. These include developing tech decorations in Oasis Island, improving Yanu's expedition skill to enhance research speed, being in an alliance that has control of a scholar's tower, holding the chief minister position in the king's castle, and having your king use the fresh ideas skill for your kingdom. So try to time starting your big research projects accordingly, since you get the benefit for temporary boosts only active when you start the research project, not for an already running research project. And finally, research is only one thing to optimize if you want to get the most out of your Kingshot game, so be sure to check out the rest of my Kingshot Kickstart playlist, as well as the rest of my channel for more smart tips, tricks, and guides. Thanks again for watching, and happy gaming out there.